Good morning. And good morning to those of you who are streaming with us here. This is, as the hymn says, Welcome Happy Day. And today we gather around the out-of-the-box man. Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ, is the most out-of-the-box human being to have ever lived. And when you take a look at how his life was and how his life is, there's one thing that jumps out, and it is how many people are trying to put Jesus back in some sort of box. And the genius of Jesus is that he defies human control and human categorization. Now, I know many of you know this story, but I'm just going to zing through it, as they say. So, Jesus' out-of-the-box life begins at his baptism at the Jordan, where he gathers with John the Baptist, and he has a unique, one-of-a-kind experience of an ongoing intimacy and communion with God, who he calls Father, or Abba. And in that baptism, he experiences a unique, one-of-a-kind calling to be the Christ, the Messiah, and to reveal that unseen divine being. And ironically, that divine spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness, the Judean wilderness, the desert, a hard rock desert. And there he experiences the devil trying to box him in. That's what these three temptations are about. And Jesus refuses. And as he moves out of the Judean desert, he moves north back to his hometown. And he settles into the synagogue and reads from the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and says essentially, this is who I am, this is my ministry, and this is my mission. And his old hometown friends try to put him into the Nazareth box. And they say, isn't this the carpenter's kid? And when Jesus will not go back into his childhood box, they decide to kill him. What a neighborhood. And they want to throw him off the cliff headlong, as it says in the scriptures. And so, in what would make an incredible movie scene, Jesus walks out of his town, never looks back, and he becomes a vagabond. He is a nobody from nowhere with no place to lay his head. And he has no official religious authority. And yet, he begins to do all of this incredible, outrageous, out-of-the-box religious stuff. He begins to teach about what he calls the kingdom of God with an otherworldly authority. And he drives out demons, he heals people, he forgives sins, he sees into people's hearts and lives and provides for them that which their soul needs. He walks on water, he calms storms, he feeds 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He raises 3 people from the dead. All of this divine stuff, but the out-of-the-box way we speak of Jesus, fully divine and fully human. And we see also that Jesus weeps for his friends. He has compassion on those who are hurting. He's frustrated, and he also laughs at his friends. He gives them nicknames, and he has a propensity to invite himself over for dinner, which I think is just what most single men do. They invite themselves to dinner, and Jesus did a lot of it. And his disciples, his followers, really only had as much as a half a clue about what this out-of-the-box guy was doing. And ironically, the only being that understood Jesus were the demons. And as you know, if you followed along the story, it doesn't go well for the demons. Of course, remembering that incredible Gerasene demoniac story where the demoniac is chained in a graveyard, and Jesus puts the demons into a bunch of pigs who run off the cliff and drown themselves. And he hung out with those who were outside the box of social acceptability. The hated tax collectors, the shunned sinners, those who were considered impure and unholy, and all of the marginalized people. and he honored and befriended women in a very misogynist society in ways that it just wasn't done. And the interesting thing is that Jesus taught what he lived. He made incarnate everything he taught. So therefore, his teaching is totally out of the box. And in fact, he takes on the whole human propensity to make boxes and to decide who is in and who is out. He teaches us, if we can hear it, to love our enemies. He teaches us, do not judge. And he teaches us that everyone is our neighbor. No exceptions, none, period, no exceptions. Everybody is your neighbor. And he also took on the whole question of the purity laws that were so embedded in his society, dictating what was holy and what was unholy. And he challenged everybody who tried to put God in a box. That's what the story of the prodigal son is about. It's about a prodigal God whose divine love is so over the top that it's hard for us to understand. And he described a God of reversal, an upside-down kingdom of God, where the values and views of the kingdom are the exact opposite of the culture that he was raised in. Now, all of this out-of-the-box Jesus was really, really problematic. And the Pharisees and the scribes, the keepers of the box, they just hammered him. And he hammered right back. Do you remember when he said to them, the tax collectors and prostitutes are going into the kingdom of heaven ahead of you? I mean, that is so insulting to their whole understanding of the being of God and their way of life. And while he's so far out of the box, his family panics. And they go to try to pull him out of this stuff and return him to some sort of normalcy. And he rejects his family. This idea that Jesus is a family man is not true. Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my mother and my sister." On a Sunday, Jesus parades into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey, an out-of-the-box Messiah. Not the one that most everybody's looking for, a militaristic warrior to throw off the Roman oppressors. He rides into Jerusalem a spiritual warrior, a humble Prince of Peace. And as he comes, he exposes and absorbs all of the sin and violence that we humans perpetrate on one another. As St. Mark tells the story, on Monday, Jesus comes back down the Mount of Olives and through the Kidron Valley and up into the Temple Mount, and he takes on the biggest box in Jesus' world, the very center of all things in Jesus' Jewish world. He takes on the temple, and he flips over the money changers' tables in a fit of anger, and he prophesies that the temple will be destroyed. And this is way too much for the box keepers. Jesus is dangerously out of the box. And so, you know the story. By Friday morning, Jesus is standing before Pontius Pilate, the feared Roman procurator. Now, Pilate is doing everything Pilate can do to get Jesus into a box that Pilate can understand. And Jesus will have none of it. I mean, the conversation is maddening. I mean, you remember that one point where he says to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus says, "You say so." Like, there's nothing Pilate can do. And Pilate is in over his head. And he's completely flummoxed. And ironically, he's the one full of fear. And so he defaults to the one thing he knows, violence. And so powers conspire to put Jesus in the ultimate box. He undergoes a brutal crucifixion outside the walls in a stone pit, a quarry called Golgotha, and by 3 p.m. he's dead. His friends quietly take him off the cross, and he is placed in a death box, a cave, a tomb. He's wrapped in these burial clothes, kind of like we might think of as a mummy, as a special cloth put over his face, and an enormous rock is rolled in the front of the tomb. And you know the story. It's why we're here today. 3 days later, he's not in the box. That is the one thing that all the Gospels can agree on, which is Jesus is not in the box. The tomb is empty. And if you turn to your order of service, the front page of your order of service, and for those of you who are streaming, sorry you do not have that, and we will pack it up later and show it, but it is the picture of a Fra Angelico fresco from the 1400s. And what's the central tenet that it shows us? It shows us that Jesus is not in the box. And that's what the whole first half of the gospel is about that Father John just read. Mary Magdalene, Peter, and the beloved disciple are running around freaking out that Jesus is not in the box. And look at Mary Magdalene. She's holding her head. She cannot comprehend what is going on here. So, as many of you know, in Jesus' day, most Jewish people believed in the resurrection. It's just that they believed at the resurrection at the end of time for everybody. But nobody believed in a resurrection of one person in time. And that's what makes the resurrection of Jesus the greatest out-of-the-box event of all time. Now, Mary Magdalene, as you know, hangs around the empty box. And then at some point during that day, Jesus appears to her. And this is, as you've got the theme of my homily down, an incredible out-of-the-box experience. So she's looking for Jesus, but Jesus finds her. She thinks he's the gardener. She doesn't recognize him by sight. She doesn't recognize him by ear because they're talking. The only time she recognizes him is when she realizes he knows her. And then you get the Rabboni, and he says, do not touch me, do not cling to me, do not hold on to me. There's something happening with Jesus' out-of-the-box body, and then he commissions her to go and tell. She becomes the apostle to the apostles in what is assuredly an incredible out-of-the-box thing to do, because in Jesus' day, women were not considered reliable witnesses. Now, the second portion of the passage that we read this morning from John's Gospel is governed by Mary Magdalene's question about where is the Lord? She's asking him, where is the Lord? Where is he? Where is he? If you just tell me where he is. And the question of where is Jesus remains with us today. And the answer is, of course, out of the box. So the scriptures are very clear that Jesus returns to the divine being of God whence he came, and that Jesus returned to be with his people and to have an omnipresence in the world. So this is something he told his disciples was going to happen. At the Last Supper, he says, you have heard me say to you, I am going away and I'm coming to you. So in other words, Jesus is totally out of the box. He's not contained by time or space. He's not contained by place. He's divine life. He is here and he's there. He's immanent and he's transcendent. He's heavenly and he's cosmic. And he's also personal and particular to each of us. None of you would be here if you didn't have some sense, or you brought here by somebody who had some sense that Jesus was there and alive for them. Now, if you turn over to the back page, and again, for those of you who are streaming, sorry, you may not be able to see the back page, but I'll describe it. This is an icon of the Anastasius at Kora in Istanbul, Turkey. It's a very important icon in the Eastern Orthodox tradition. And it depicts the resurrected Christ breaking down the gates of hell. Those are the two planks under Jesus' feet. Those are the gates of hell. And he breaks down the gates so that he can pull Adam and Eve out of their boxes. He pulls them out of their sarcophagi, their tombs, their caskets. And you'll notice that Jesus is surrounded by an olive-shaped oval called a mandorla, and that represents the box from which Jesus emerged. That represents the cave, and it represents his divinity. Now, for those of you who are fans of reading icons, you know that Adam and Eve always represent all humanity. Adam and Eve represent you and me. And look how Jesus does his work. He grabs Adam and Eve by the wrist. He does not depend on their strength. He does it himself. And this icon tells the Easter truth that Christ is pulling us all from death to life. When Jesus is teaching, those of you who follow along in this, you know that Jesus said to his disciples, "I am the resurrection and the life." Now, what he is saying by that is he is the inner divine force that raises you up to life. And that's life with a capital L, the life of God, the life that doesn't end, divine life. And that the resurrection is not just about what happens to us after we die. It is that, but it's more than that. It's about our life today and tomorrow and to the next day. And so what Jesus is doing is he is trying to pull us out of our little boxes, our little perspectives, our fears. You remember that the next story is the disciples are locked in the upper room out of fear. They are literally locked in a box of fear. And Jesus shows up in their box of fear. And that's what Jesus is seeking to do with you, to show up in your box of fear or your perspectives, whatever it is that boxes you in, whether or not it's your hometown friends or your family or issues of social acceptability or whatever today's purity laws are, or our internal demons or the pilots of our world, or your religious box. No religion, no Christian denomination can control Jesus and summarize the being that he is. And what Jesus is doing is he is seeking to pull us to an out-of-the-box life, a life that is a radically different way of living, a life that is based on the way he lived, the way he lives, and what he taught. Now, I don't know what your issues are. I don't. I mean, we all have our own issues. And when we encounter Jesus, like Mary Magdalene encounters Jesus, however or wherever, he seeks to pull us into his life, not just out, but in. And when we get pulled into Jesus' life, we get plugged into a divine circuitry that is dictated and driven by divine life, a life that transcends death. He is plugging us in to a light that enlightens, and he is plugging us in to a love, which is the only thing that lasts. Everything else falls away. And so we begin our day here with horns and drums and singing Jesus Christ is risen today. And it is true, Jesus Christ is risen today. And so whatever your thing is, whatever that thing that's in you, which is, a kind of little death, I suggest that you let Jesus reach in there and grab a hold of you. You can't do this on your own. You would have done it on your own if you could have. The things you can't do on your own, you let Jesus grab a hold of you and pull you to a new life. You will be so much more alive. It is so worth the singing. That's what it's all about. Let Jesus help you to be more alive.